Hey Afronauts, I'm Jill too.
I'm Chelsea Gaden.
And I'm Beatrice Winifred Eicher. And welcome to the Afronauts podcast. Yay! Today's episode is going to be, it was initially conceived through my Voodoonauts class that I taught a class about Southern Gothic genre this past summer. And I wanted to bring that over to Afronauts. Because I love Southern Gothic genre. And some of my favorite TV shows are Southern Gothic. And I wanted us to vibe together, guys.
Yes,
Yes.
I'm scared, but I'm ready. And
I'm here for the
as of
vibes.
the airing of this episode, it will be spooky season, so it's
Yes.
totally on brand and on theme. So, yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah. Okay, so for the listeners, we are looking at a chart ourselves, and I will have this chart in the show notes. The three TV shows we will be discussing are The Vampire Diaries, True Blood, and Interview with the Vampire. Interview with the Vampire having a fun renaissance with the Netflix.
Right?
It's not
I
on
saw
Netflix
that.
now as of like today.
I might watch it
Yes.
now.
In real
I'm like,
life, in real time.
let me give it a shot.
You should. You definitely
You
should. Highly
should.
recommend. I've
You
seen it twice.
should.
I watched it all the way through twice.
Okay, are
So I
you a
love it so
baby?
much.
Are you a baby about stuff? Because I'm a baby about
I
stuff.
mean, to me it's like if you I'm pretty sure if you've seen True Blood, then
I
it's
was gonna
not.
ask Beatrice, like
It's
True Blood and
not.
Interview with the Vampire, like are they on par, like violence gore wise? Like how would you?
Honestly, I would say True Blood is more violent than Interview with
Okay,
the Vampire.
okay,
Now, especially later seasons of True Blood,
yeah,
where once you get to like the religious camp and like
yeah,
once
yeah,
we're in that situation,
yeah.
things get kind of weird anyway.
Okay,
But Interview with the Vampire, I would say the gore is fairly low, and the
okay,
actual
Yeah.
horrorness, the creepiness
yeah,
is more to do with like the character arcs and more to
Mhm.
do with like what it means to be a vampire for our characters, as opposed
okay,
to this is
Yeah.
a creepy.
Yeah, it's not like
Yeah,
scary, like,
yeah,
okay.
it's
I
not
might get
like a
into it.
jump scare.
Maybe this is my spooky season watch. Maybe this will be my.
Yes.
Yes.
But this is a good segue into all of us talking about which of these shows we have seen and which ones we haven't seen. I will go last. Chelsea, you go first.
Okay, I have seen The Vampire Diaries, but I have not finished the show. Like I forget at which point I was just like I quit. I think
Yeah,
there's too
yeah.
like it was too much suffering for my girl Bonnie,
Hmm.
and I was just
Yeah.
like she can't win, and I just had to like you know drop that one. I've never seen True Blood. I've seen like clips and stuff, but I've never like really watched it. But Interview with the Vampire, I have seen all the way through twice. I love it. That is my everything. I may watch it again.
As you should. As you
Yeah.
should. Okay, Jill, what about you?
I have only seen True Blood out of these three.
Okay.
Eggs and Eric Northman are bae. So that's it.
As eggs should be. Oh my gosh. I forgot about eggs till you just
Eggs, of course. You can't talk about
eggs.
Tara without talking about eggs.
You're right. You're so right. Eggs was so good for her. Also, I think eggs was good.
Yes,
Eggs was
I
good
agree.
for her.
I agree.
Okay, so I have seen all three of these shows. Not to their, let's see. True Blood, I stopped before the last season. I've seen all of Interview with the Vampire and all of Vampire Diaries. Yeah, so I've seen all of these shows. And I wanted to talk specifically about the Black characters in these shows. So for the Vampire Diaries, we're going to talk about Bonnie Bennett. For True Blood, we'll talk about Tara. For Interview with the Vampire, we'll talk about Louis. Interview with the Vampire, we could also talk about Claudia, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I definitely think so.
We could do that too. But Louis is the main character.
I
So
do think
we'll
we
focus
need
on.
to be a little bit more mindful of like
Okay.
spoilers for Interview with the Vampire, just because
I
like
agree.
I feel like
I
it's
agree.
not it's still pretty fresh.
I definitely agree. And I think even if we just stick with like, we know one of the best things about Interview with the Vampire, and this is not a spoiler for me, is that Louis, the main character, is a Creole man. And he was adapted from a white character in Anne Rice's books to be a Creole man for the reboot, the AMC reboot. And I love that change that they made. I really loved that they followed up that change with like impact to the character. Him being Creole matters. He is able to move in places that other Black people cannot. But he is also never given all of the privileges of a white person. And I love to see that nuance on screen.
And it's so impactful to his character. Like it's almost essential.
Yeah.
It's almost like a fundamental element of his character. Like if you were to take that away, I haven't read the books. Have you read any of the books?
I've read the first 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I haven't read any of them. So I don't know, like I think it's a different time period too, right? In the books.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So I love the choice of like his character and the time and the place. Like excellent.
Yes, the time period's really fun. New Orleans in the 20s is fun. And I think you get to see more of that, the impact of him being Creole because of the time period. I think because you get a little more distance from the war, you get to see a little bit more of how society plays out, and he gets to have a business. He gets to have like more than one business. He has employees. He pays for his mother's house and like all of this stuff. Like he's a really privileged man.
But he's still a Black man.
And yet he's still a Black man. And you know, he gets to talk to the aldermen, he gets to talk to councilmen, and he gets to like be in spaces. But while he's there, they're oftentimes checking him. They're oftentimes reminding him, you are a Black man in here. And there's actually one part that, this is not a spoiler, but there's one part that I think really encapsulates how well Interview with a Vampire did with Louis' race. And it's a part where Louis is in his business. He's talking to like aldermen, like really important people in town. And Louis says, you know, times have changed. Like I have things to say. I have like thoughts and feelings and like everything. And one of the aldermen looks at him and says, you know, I'm not gonna lie, I miss the days when you were deferential. I miss the days when you didn't have the privileges that you have. I prefer that. I don't like that you get to talk to me like this. And so that conversation, oh, it was so obviously bad, but like it was such a good portrayal of that nuance of race that I want to say we do not get in the Vampire Diaries. Moving on to Bonnie.
Yes.
That nuance we don't get with Bonnie.
Before we move on though,
yeah,
I would like to say that like there's so much in Interview with the Vampire that has to do with like his anger as like a Black man in his position, and how like pairing that with like the power of like vampirism is so interesting to watch. And like
it is.
I was gonna ask that, like, can we talk about the intersectionality of like him being a vampire and him being Black? Like,
yes,
like what does that mean for him? Are there ways that like being a vampire helps, ways that it hurts, or like within the vampire community is race a factor? Like I haven't seen the show, so
so I do want to say like when you think about like what being a vampire usually is, it's usually like a metaphor for like what, like power, like desire, like what else? What else?
Others.
Being othered.
Yeah.
So it's like all those things, especially like the power one. Like think about like being disempowered as like a Black person in society, but then having this like other power that you have to choose whether or not to like use it, how much of it to use. It's just very, I don't know, very interesting to see how
it is really interesting. Yeah. And then
they chose to address
speaking of anger, when he has that anger, when it comes from a place of this person is being racist to me, once he's a vampire, he can react in a different way than he could as a human.
Right.
And him learning the pros and cons of that. Like,
Mhm.
I can use this power, I can use these abilities, you know, to a certain extent. How much is too much?
Yeah.
And we do see him, not to go into spoilers, I won't talk about it, but we do see him have to grapple with power, with his power,
Yes.
and with his anger, and using it in ways that are good and bad. And he learns a lot about himself because of the
Mhm.
vampirism,
Mhm.
which is super, super cool.
Oh,
They did
yeah.
a really beautiful job with a black man's anger and what that does when he turns into a vampire.
Mhm.
But he's also a very moral man, I would say, you know?
Yes, I would say he's like tortured by his like humanity
He's
and
tortured by
morality.
his humanity. That's part of what makes his vampirism so interesting, is that he doesn't just fall into it easily and
Yeah.
just like immediately pick up drinking from humans, immediately pick up like all these new abilities. It's
Mhm.
difficult for him,
Yeah.
and it continues to be. And I think that's really interesting too.
Mhm. Back to
But yeah,
Bonnie.
back to Bonnie.
Mhm.
Um, Bonnie's
Now,
blackness is not addressed in the same way that Louisa's, and that is, I think, to her detriment.
I
Mhm.
would say it's disempowering, actually, how they don't
Mm.
address her blackness or any of the witches' blackness. Like it's not
Mhm.
like I'm
Yeah,
pretty sure in the Vampire Diaries, it's not like I don't think you have to be black to be a witch. I think it's just like a family line type thing, and they
it
don't.
is. Yeah, it's they have ancestral magic,
Mhm.
but it's not tied to their blackness, which
Mhm.
is a really, I think that kind of shows you the like sloppiness
Right.
and translating this, because Bonnie is a black Southern girl
Mhm.
descended from enslaved people. She would have that there would be some kind of setup for her magic wise. So
Mhm.
it's interesting that like she has ancestral magic that she can pull from, but it's not tied to her blackness.
Wait, have
But
you seen the originals?
I have.
Okay, I saw some episodes, and I do think because it's in the is it in the past? No, it's in a different location.
It's in New Orleans.
It's in New Orleans. Like, it's
Yeah.
also in New
New Orleans is a
Orleans.
good place for magic. I think
It
it's just like,
is.
yeah.
It is. And I think they do have black witches also. I forget whether or not they
There's all
address.
different, yeah, in the originals, the witches are all different races, ethnicities. It's
Mm,
much more diverse,
Mhm.
as
okay.
opposed to the Vampire Diaries. All of the witches are black, and yet that's kind of the weirdness. Like, all the witches are black, but their magic isn't tied to their blackness.
Yeah.
Bonnie's actually descended from Salem witches.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
so it's not, so literally her like her power source comes from whiteness.
From a white person, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and even in the show they say, you know, vaguely, I'm from the Salem witches, but later on in the series they get specific with the specific person Bonnie is descended
Mhm.
from,
Mhm.
this, and it was a white woman.
Mhm.
So her power source, even though it's ancestral, is actually sourced from white people, and I think that's
Yeah.
part of why
You're
her
right.
blackness feels so hollow.
And not just that. I mean, like if you play it out, right? Like there might have been a white woman who was like the witch that was the source of it, but like we know that like that far back when like whiteness is entering the line, that it's not a love match, right?
Exactly. So it's kind
No,
of like,
yeah,
So like Emily
yeah,
Bennett
so how
had
did it
her
find its
grandson
way into
somewhere.
Bonnie?
Yeah,
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
right.
And that
So
was really interesting how they
yeah,
did that
yeah,
through time, of
yeah,
like the main like way back ancestor, and then the Salem witches, which are much closer in relation,
yeah.
and then her, they call it Civil War ancestors,
Mhm.
Mm.
which I fucking hate that term, but because her Civil War, quote unquote, Civil War ancestors were enslaved for their magic. Emily
Yeah,
Bennett was enslaved for her magic,
yeah.
but she could do magic for Catherine.
Got it.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
Where did Emily Bennett's magic come from? All of
Right.
her black ancestors,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, it's
I
so
think
yeah,
this is kind of the problem with, because this is kind of like with Legendborn,
right.
you
But at
know,
least Tracy Dion
how
like names it, right? She's like, this is where my
but
power
Tracy
came
Dion does a
from.
much better, yeah,
Yes.
Tracy does a
And
much
Emily
better
grapples with
job
that.
at it.
She says, like, this is the only way it came in, and like, yes, it's my power, but I can still grieve the reality of how that happened, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems
And
like
So
yeah,
this doesn't even address that,
yeah,
right?
to not
no.
address it, to ignore it. Like, I mean, to me, I would say this is an example of doing a race change wrong, where
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
you don't take the character's history or background into consideration
Right.
when you're
Mhm.
creating this. It's essentially a new character that you have to think of. Like this
Yeah.
changes
Yeah.
fundamentally.
Yeah.
I'm sure like the Louis in the show is different in some fundamental ways from the Louis in the books. I'm not.
Absolutely. And that, as you said, comes from translating it and translating the character into a Black man. And they just did not translate Bonnie into a Black teenager. They just turned the white teenager Black and
Yes.
just made all of her family Black,
Okay.
but didn't account for any historical context, any of like
Cultural context or
cultural context. These people would have like a large amount of like family members, and like it's really strange to me. Yeah.
They kind of like, I mean, I don't know the show, but I know the like the lore of the production. They like marginalized like they wrote the character off into the margins, right? Like they didn't give her like the love arc she deserved. They didn't do
Mhm.
like,
oh,
Yeah.
right?
that's
Like
where I quit. I think they killed her
they like did
man or
her
something.
dirty in the sense of like
Oh
all these things she
gosh.
was set
I
up
mean,
to
if we're
do.
gonna count how many times they did Bonnie dirty, we'll be here
Yeah, so
forever. But
I mean it's like
no,
all
yeah,
of it.
they definitely,
Yeah.
love interest wise, magic wise, even friendship wise, she's abandoned. Her mother abandons her.
Yeah,
Her
like they just like
father
cut trauma
doesn't
and
care
pain
about
and
her.
like
Her
yeah.
grandmother's. I mean, it's just
And
like
was any of that stuff book accurate, or did they like change
I don't
it for
even
the
remember.
show?
I only read the book one time as like a teenager, so
Mhm.
I can't speak to that.
But
I
even
am
if it was,
curious to
right, I
know.
think like you have to be responsible when you're doing that translation that like in the context of having it be a black actress, black character now, like that is
Exactly.
different.
Surrounded by like a mostly all white cast.
Right.
Like
Yeah. Like if
you
her
need
story
Right.
is all
to
about trauma, like that changes things in a big way when she
A
becomes
big way. She
yeah.
would be forever impacted
Yeah.
by that. But and I found this interesting, and this is my fun side note, re Bonnie's hair. And this is all
Mm.
I'll say about Bonnie's hair
Mhm.
is that Bonnie often met with her elderly grandmother,
Mhm.
who was a Black elderly woman.
Mhm.
And I just want to say that I don't think
She would let her leave the house looking the
I
way
just don't do not as someone it would
I
never
mean, it's
happen. Her grandmother would
it's
never
kind of
leave,
fun.
like she would force her into the car, force her into like into a hairdresser's, like it would be I just want to say that normally a Black grandmother would at the very least have a lot of opinions to say to you about your hair. I just want to say that, and that's all I'll say.
right.
Moving on to Tara in True Blood. Tara, when it comes to race, when we meet Tara, she immediately lets the audience know I'm Black. I
Mhm.
know I'm Black, and I'm aware of racism, and I think that I'm oftentimes a victim of racism.
Mhm.
And I love that she immediately like we meet Tara at her first job in a store, and she's
Mhm.
like angry, and I love it. I love Tara. I
It's fun.
love her relationship with her Blackness.
Yes.
I think that also translated from a white character was done in a what better than Bonnie was done.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a long time since I watched the show, but I remember race in True Blood being really interesting because like it's such a like it's like a backwater Louisiana town, and like you get the
Mhm.
sense that like both like black, white, like Creole, like everybody has been there for generations. Like the Cajuns, like everyone has just been there, right? And so
Yeah,
like
yeah.
while everybody is different and like they have their differences and they have their kind of lines of difference and boundaries, like they absolutely like all have been like stewing in the same pot together in a way that like they get each other better than outsiders would, right? Like if a white
Mhm.
like northerner comes into town, I think the white folks in oh my gosh, what's the name of the town? In
Bonton.
Montauk, yeah. Montauk are gonna band together with the Cajuns and the black people in Montauk more before they're gonna band together with the northerners, right? Like they just get
Yeah,
each
and that's very much small southern town
yeah.
of like you have a lot of racial issues, a lot of racial tensions, but you're all from this town.
Mhm.
And we can all agree on like that.
Yeah.
And that's like one of the things I loved about True Blood was that you really felt like you were in that small town like the entire time, and it never felt like, even when the production got bigger, they obviously got bigger budgets.
Yeah.
You still felt like this is a small town Louisiana show, and I love that.
Yeah.
I have a question since I haven't seen the show. Is like the vampire-ness, is it known in the town since it's more small and close knit? Like, is it like, is everyone like aware of it? How is it like? It's like a secret?
It's basically it's set in like an alternate like current time when like vampires are just like a known thing, and so like they make like True Blood soda. It's like that's where the name come from. So like True Blood is like a can of Coke, but it's blood, and vampires will order instead of like beer or whatever.
Oh,
like
wow.
Yeah, so it's like everybody knows that there's vampires and stuff. And it's pretty obvious when people come into town that like they are vampires or not. And so there's just like
everyone knows immediately if you're a vampire.
Mistrust of them. But it's not like a secret that like vampires are around. Yeah.
Interesting.
No, they made a whole like announcement. They call it, they came out of the coffin. And they literally had like press conferences.
There's politicians.
Vampires have whole government, whole governmental structures.
Okay, now I feel like I need to watch it because
the main love interest for the first season, Bill, is not Bill. No, sorry, spoilers. A different character is actually like the vampire governor of like Texas, governor of Mississippi. Like later on in the series we meet vampire governors, vampires like
in positions of power.
Positions of power. What do I want to sheriffs? Vampire. There's a lot of sheriffs.
Okay.
Yeah. A lot of sheriffs. It's actually really interesting. I would love to just watch a show just about vampire governments. That's such an interesting, they actually talk a lot about how long the governments have been in place, which obviously predates the American government system. Right. And so when the humans are like, you can't, blah, 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 the vampires are like, we were here before, we were way older than you. And I thought, and I think that's a really interesting, the governmental.
Well, it makes sense if they're like, really if they live longer.
Right. And it's more stable, right? Because you have the same people in power for longer. Like they really have their shit together in a way that the does not.
They're in power for like more than 100 years.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
It
doesn't make me wonder if like people were kind of like, that guy's been mayor for a long time. Doesn't make me wonder. But is the character what's her name?
Hera.
Is she a vampire? Okay, no. In the beginning of the show.
She's
not a vampire.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, she's not.
And the silence.
Yeah, they do, and like this is maybe what people like think it jumps the shark a little bit, but like they do over the course of each season add a whole bunch more paranormal stuff. So then all of a sudden there's werewolves and fairies and like all these other things that come in. And so people's abilities change and kind of morph throughout the show. And you're always like, wait, is he a werewolf? Or I can't remember, or what's going on.
Yes. And Tara always gets to interact with the supernatural though, which is interesting. Even from the first episode, she is immediately, because her best friend, Sookie's love interest is the vampire. So she is like immediately thrust into the world of the supernatural via her best friend Sookie, which is the same thing as Vampire Diaries, Bonnie, thrust in via I want to say Nina Dobrev, that's not her name. Elena. Elena's boyfriend is a vampire. So interesting. That makes sense. The black girl is the best friend in both of these.
To tag along, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But in True Blood, Tara gets more agency. Yes. She and her mom. I liked that in the first season, her and her mom go to the woods to meet this like hoodoo woman to do an exorcism, and that storyline is that is how you translate a character, because through that whole thing we see hoodoo, we do see a little bit of ancestor veneration, we see some black specific like Christianity, and it's so interesting to see, and it's so beautiful, and I wish that we got that same kind of a situation for Bonnie, where Bonnie could like interact with hoodoo or voodoo or whatever. I wish that like they could interact with these things that are like specific to their culture, because that would have made the character feel much more real, authentic.
Mhm.
I love Tara. I think Tara might be my favorite out of all of these characters now that I
That's awesome. And yeah, she really did have her own agency. Like she fought hard for her
fought
friendship.
hard.
Like,
Yeah.
she had some really big like arcs of her own. I think she had two love interests over the course of the show, at least two that I could think of.
At least two. Yeah.
Yeah, like she was just badass and like she had like
Also
her
shout out Lafayette.
Yes, I was gonna say Lafayette.
Lafayette. I had the biggest crush on Lafayette for a long time. That man is beautiful.
Yes.
Beautiful man.
Yeah, I just feel like we could have had a show about Tara and like it would have made total sense,
Absolutely.
right? Like, she could have been her own, like she was fully fleshed out in True Blood to the point where like they could have switched seasons and she would have been the main character and I would have totally bought it.
She should have been the main character.
Enough would have happened that it would have made total sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And now I need to check it out. Now I have to watch True Blood.
Yes, highly recommend.
You do need to watch True Blood.
Yes,
it's
so
really good.
I think you'd really like it, Chelsea.
I probably would.
If you like Interview with a Vampire, I think you'd like True Blood.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Also, Interview with the Vampire was nice because of how queer it was, and True Blood,
yes,
obviously less queer, but Lafayette is such a fun character, and I love to see him. But yeah, the queerness in Interview with the Vampire is really good.
Oh, we didn't get to talk about Claudia and Claudia's Blackness.
Claudia. Okay. Talk about Claudia. Yeah.
So, season 2, a little bit of spoilers, but not really. Claudia and Louis are traveling together, and they ended up joining. Well, Claudia joins this like vampire theater troupe.
Okay,
is that the right word? Troupe.
Yeah, theater troupe.
And as Beatrice and I were discussing, we think like one of the main characters within this troupe, we suspect that like he was racist because he doesn't like fully embrace these two Black characters. It's never like directly said, but it's more like, what would you say?
You get the vibes. You just get the vibe. I mean, you see the way he looks at them, and you're just like,
yeah.
Yeah, it's like for him, they're always outsiders, but even more so than like this is the family and you're not part of it. It's more like you can never really, you know what I mean?
You'll never be
like,
one of us.
Yes, that is the vibe. You'll never be one of us. Like you will always be another.
Yeah. Yes. And so race, even.
But where is that? It was Paris, right?
That's Paris. I want to say 1940s. Obviously, yeah, 1940s.
But realistically, there would be Black people. There would be like
there was
and they're in the arts. It's like the underground arts too. So like definitely, in that scene.
I think that the lack of Black people in Paris was a choice.
Right. I was gonna say that doesn't sound.
It's a weird choice. There have always been a good amount of Black people in Paris. So for there not to have been a single new Black character in Paris it was weird. It was like,
It makes me wonder if it was a choice to kind of like highlight that otherness for them, or if it was just kind of like, I don't know, because I feel like oftentimes that is a huge issue with a lot of shows. Like if Black people don't like serve the story, they like don't exist.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right, because if they had Black people in that theater troupe, would it have made a difference?
I think absolutely. I think it would have questioned.
Like it should have.
I think it would have made. I think whenever Black people are there, like for me, like in real life with all of us, it's like there's a sense of like, okay, like a little comfort, a little like relaxation, a little trust that's there. But when there's no Black people, there's always like you're like a little on guard, a little just like a little always aware.
Yeah, like, you're always aware. You're the only one.
This is not a safe space.
Yeah, and I think that vampirism is like the personification of that feeling of like I am divorced. I said this in my Voodoonauts classes that I think of vampirism as the personification of being divorced from society, and how that otherness can be translated to like Blackness, queerness, whatever. And how Interview with the Vampire did that really well of both the Blackness, the queerness, the otherness of even Lestat, who's for this like lively, vivacious French vampire, is also othered. So yeah, I think vampirism as a way to talk about othering people is always really fun.
Yeah.
It's really fun. But the otherness, but empowered otherness, I guess, is what I'd call it. But
yes, I love that.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of like A Song Below Water, right? Like, did you guys read that?
Oh,
yes.
Right?
yeah.
That's like her voice was her power. But what did they do with it once they realized that it was mostly Black women that had this power? They like made them like not allowed to use it.
Yeah. They
Yeah,
wanted
like,
to like
that's a
stamp it
crime.
out.
Yeah, we're gonna like put this down your throat and you're not gonna use it. Yeah, the same thing, right? Like as a vampire, like you have all this power. Or even like fifth season, right? N.K. Jemisin.
Ooh, yeah.
Very much the same way of like this like marginalized group has this unbelievable like supernatural ability. We're going to like ostracize them and make and put all these rules around it so that they cannot use their power the way that they could, kind of like unfettered, right? Like
Yeah.
yeah.
I think control is a really is like kind of like a through line through all of these TV shows also is control.
Yeah.
Is like
Like
how we control
based on fear, right? Like
everything.
fear motive.
Yes.
Just like I'm afraid of you because you're so powerful and I don't know you / trust you because you're different. And so we're gonna make it so that you can't do these things. Yeah. Yeah.
That hurts somewhere deep inside.
It does. But then you know what it also makes me feel? It also makes me feel like they create the monsters themselves, right? Like that's what it makes me think. Like having all this power, like all these characters are all empowered in their own ways. It's like the treatment of them to me, it's kind of like, well no wonder they become monsters
Yeah,
in some sense. It's like that's the result of like the treatment.
Absolutely. You know, Claudia is a really good example of that. Of like someone who was given a lot of power, maybe for better or worse, given a lot of power at a really young age. And what happens when you give someone that young that much power? And I thought that that arc of like I'm a 14-year-old vampire was super fascinating. And I was super excited to see Claudia also because like I said, I loved her in the books, so I was really excited to see her in the TV show. And the actress for season 1, Claudia, fucking killed it. Amazing, out of the park, incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my question would be like, as somebody who writes Southern Gothic, and also has seen all these shows and read a lot of the books that they're based on, or all the books that they're based on, you know, like how do you think, Beatrice, about like the responsibility of writing in Southern Gothic, and you know, especially if you're thinking about racial lines, but just like that intersection of race and the different like paranormal or like fantastical elements that can be in Southern Gothic genre, Southern Gothic novels.
Yeah, I think for me, my Southern Gothic novels often include hoodoo and religious horror. Those two I find go really hand in hand. And when you include hoodoo, you get a lot of really rich history immediately with it. And so I find as soon as I include that into my Southern Gothic stories, it really fills out the characters. It can fill out the backstories for current and past characters. And then, like I said, ancestor veneration, religious horror. As someone who grew up in the Black church, I spent a lot of time studying the Bible and a lot of time thinking about how these stories are actually really creepy. A lot of them are actually really horrifying, and they are. And I love to hear about that in sermons as a child. Actually, I think adding in the it's so hard to talk about religion because I wanna say religion is such a difficult thing to write about, But it's such an integral part of a Black Southern experience that, like hoodoo, once you bring in religion in any capacity of a character's life, you are also filling out that character, that town, that region
Well, yeah, because
immediately.
it says so much about who they are,
Yeah.
who they're surrounded by, like what. You're right. That's so so true.
Yeah.
And it's so many, when I say religion, I do mean Christianity at large, Protestants generally, not always. But when you even go deeper than that, my family built a holiness church that is very different than a Pentecostal church, which is very different than a Baptist, et cetera, et cetera. And there are a lot of places in the South that take these denominations very seriously. My family being one of those people. And so just including that in a story immediately, so much history, so much depth of character of life. I really want to push people to include these kinds of things in Southern Gothic novels, Black people especially, because that's so integral to our history and can add such cool flavor to Southern Gothic novels. My religious horror is my favorite part of every book I write, because I always have religious horror in like all of my YA and adult books. So I love writing religious horror, and it's such, and like I said, a rich part of Black history, that when you include it, it fills it out. It makes it much more authentic and much more, I think, of a real read. So yeah.
Well, it sounds like, I mean, maybe we use like the Vampire Diaries as like a cautionary tale, right? But like Southern Gothic, it's
Absolutely.
not just window dressing, it's not just like moss hanging off of trees, right? It's it's a real place in time, right? It's a real kind of cultural experience, and there are lots of different subcultures within that. And it takes research, and it takes dedication and like true appreciation for like all the nuances, and like not shying away from some of like the ugly past of those places and those times in history. And if you don't kind of lean into those and really like dive deeply, then you run the risk of kind of taking your characters in the story kind of out of context entirely, and it just doesn't feel accurate or like faithful to the characters or to the story that you might be trying to tell.
Yes, please give your vibes legs to stand on.
Yes, it's not just vibes, right? Yeah, exactly.
It's not just vibes. I always say like Southern Gothic and horror is not just like dark fantasy set in the South.
Right.
Those are very different things.
Exactly.
And they are both valid, but when you are writing Southern Gothic, you're doing so with you have to know Southern Gothic came from the antebellum South. You can't divorce those two. So you are in conversation with Reconstruction, with Jim Crow when you're writing Southern Gothic novels. You can't not.
Well, even if you just think of the scenery and the architecture and the like, why are these places looking like this? Like, why does it feel like this? Like, there's more. There's more.
Yeah.